I guess the first thing that comes to mind with the defense is the improvement of the pass rush last year, because it was just not a good thing. You'll be rolling your eyes when I throw out this number because you've heard it a million times. There was a string of seasons, I don't know if it was 4 or 5, something in that range, where Nebraska was literally last in the Big Ten in sacks almost every year, with some just anemic sack totals like 22, 24 for an entire season. And they certainly improved upon that portion of the defense, if we want to get started there, or whatever your first impressions were from today's press conferences.
No, we can get started there. Yeah, one of the I think even, dating back to 2022, there was at one point, I think, a season where we might have finished not even in double digit sacks. And I don't know which year it was, but it was abysmal. And that was one of the biggest things coming into last season, because we know with Chenander's defense, Chenander ran this bend, don't break style of defense. And the bend, don't break style of defense was not really formulated on concepts of, stopping the drive. It was more so, we're going to maybe give up yards. We're going to give up, first downs, but we're going to try to play aggressive and force a turnover. And it didn't work. And there was no pass rush. There was no physicality there. It was just like, and the players almost lost the ability to, play gap sound, to tackle, to pursue. It was over pursuit. It was overly aggressive in terms of playing defense just kind of recklessly. Right now, there's a brand on the defense where it's a aggressive but physical style, but you still maintain, your pad level. You still maintain your defensive fundamentals. You're still gap sound. And that was one of the biggest reasons that when Chenander left and I think it was Bill Bush took over the defense, it, simply all he talked about was being gap sound and working on tackling, working on pursuit, just the basics. And even that little bit improved the defense. Now we're looking at, a couple years removed from that, and the team is physical. The team is tackling. They're getting hats to the ball, and they have a pass rush. And I think that was the biggest thing that people really don't realize is how important a pass rush is to the rest of the defense. It takes all of the pressure off of the DBs, the linebackers, makes their job so much easier, because when you have a quarterback, getting pressured, rolled out to his right, okay, all of a sudden you're more worried about the right side of the field. Pressured, roll out to the left. Now you're more worried about the left side of the field. He's more likely to make a mistake if he has to throw the opposite side of the field, et cetera. And, just with pressure in a quarterback's face, he's going to have to force some throws. So that makes every level on the defense that much better. And they were talking about, this year really focusing on, working certain details with some of these linemen, defensive linemen from last year. Tony White specifically, or I'm sorry, Terrence Knighton specifically mentioned, that Riley Van Poppel's stronger. He's speeding up to the game, getting live reps. Linhart, they're expecting him to make a big jump. They said he's just got to be more assertive, but he's a student of the game. He said he's an engineering guy. He's just always in the film room. Then you have Prince Will Jamari. Like it's a very deep room. The thing they were working with Nash Hutmacher that was interesting to me is they're really working on him as a 3 technique guy. Typically your 3 technique guys are going to be, and for those that don't know, what a 3 technique is basically you're playing the 3 gap between the A and B, and you're going to be shaded to the guard's shoulder as opposed to lined on the outside shoulder as opposed to lined up specifically on the nose. And you can determine, by odds and evens where they're lined up straight or whether they're lined up, on the shoulders. So the even numbers are going to be lined up, head up on the offensive lineman. The odd numbers are going to be when you're kind of in the gap. And typically for a 3 technique, it's your twitchier, more agile lineman. So it's interesting, Nash is getting to play there. I think part of what they might be trying to do is because, Nash with the wrestling, again, like I mentioned last week, wrestling, I think, is probably the most brutal and grueling sport as far as training goes. So him coming in, and they've even talked about having to kind of back Nash off a little bit just because of the wear and tear that could potentially his body could take, being on the mats and stuff like that, and just in that grueling training and him trying to put the weight back on and stuff. And they say he's doing a really good job with that, but they might be trying to take advantage of, the little bit of a leaned out frame, maybe trying to add some more muscle, maybe trying to, make him a little twitchier, and then try to expand his game to where he can play, in the gap. And what that's going to do is basically that's going to get him to the quarterback quicker, because you can't double team a guy in the 3 gap. You have to double team, the nose tackle has to, or the center has to pay attention to who's ever lined up over the nose, which is typically a bigger guy. And so that's going to open up Nash in those gaps to be able to get to the quarterback a little easier. He's lined up by the edge rusher. So that's going to be causing some problems. So I really like them talking about specifically focusing on Nash in the 3 technique spot. And, it's one of those things where it's like Nash is so good as it is. They were talking about, they even, he's getting reps. He's thinking and get reps. He wants to get reps, but they're having to back him off a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see how over the course of the spring he still develops, and how they kind of use this frame, and the conditioning has to be night and day different, even because he was talking about, wrestling 7 minutes straight on the mat of just full nonstop go. And so there's going to be a lot of things they can do with him. And then when they're putting the weight back on him, they're probably taking a different approach to make sure that they put the right weight on him, lean him out a little bit. It's not going to be a rushed thing. They said they want to get him back to 315. Shouldn't take too long. There's typically a rebound in weight after you cut water. There's going to be this huge jump as you put water retention back on, and then it's going to kind of level out. And so they're probably just, making sure that his body, while it was depleted for the wrestling, doesn't get overworked too early on in spring, and they're going to add more, as the spring goes on. So that's something that'll be interesting to watch, is how he progresses there. But they said outside of that, he's taking on a leadership role. He's coaching on the sidelines. So, Nash Hutmacher is going to be, he's going to be a force next year. And him and Ty on the inside, they said with Ty, they're working on getting him better on 3rd downs, which, was kind of a thorn in the side of Nebraska last year. Just got to get better at getting off the field early on in drives. And so it's really nice that last year it was more so they were figuring out what even we had in the defensive line. Like, do we have enough to formulate a pass rush, and how do we get a pass rush out of this group? And now that they were able to bring kind of the potential out of this defensive line, now they can start fine-tuning certain details in these guys. James Williams, they're talking about, working on him being a 1st and 2nd down guy, but that his body needs to catch up to his mind, which is fine, because you got the guys like Nash and Ty that are going to be there and help mentor these guys and help slow that down a little bit, and help them figure out how to kind of balance that out. Get the body up to the mind, and get the body working to where the mind is on the field. Because again, football is a lot of instincts and not thinking. If you're thinking, you're going to be a little late. So it's building those instincts, but also getting your body in the right place to be able to react. And right now it seems like there's a lot of different body types and different groups. We'll go over that when we go over the cornerback room. And these guys are just going to be cross-trained left and right and moving all over the place. But this defensive line is going to be a solid strength of this team. And I'm loving what Knighton was talking about and how he feels about this room, because he was talking about, he wants 7, 8, 9 guys who can be a starter and have that rotation, have that depth, get those fresh guys out there, get the young guys out there, and keep developing. And Jamari Butler, Prince Will, like all those guys, he's talking about each person brings a little something different. So they're going to be moving these guys all around that line, and it's going to cause some headaches, because they're going to be playing the matchups. They're going to be, they're going to be playing matchup on the defensive line. And he was talking about if we think we have a matchup advantage over this guy by putting, Ty on him or et cetera, they want to make sure that these guys can move around this line and play anywhere they need them to, which is why they're kind of cross-training and kind of expanding those skill sets with those guys.
Anytime you bring up wrestling, what I think of is Here's my long and illustrious wrestling career. This is about as extensive as I get with
I
wrestling.
dropped my mouse
Is
one second.
is that when I was in junior high, and I don't think this goes on very many places anymore. We had wrestling in gym. Like when my
Mm,
son was in high school and junior high, they didn't wrestle at all. But we
yep,
had wrestling. We had like 6 weeks of wrestling
that's awesome.
in gym in seventh and eighth grade. And so you're right. It's one of the most grueling, and this is not anything close to competitive wrestling. So
Mhm,
I'm not even thinking that. But yeah, I'd see my buddies who were on the wrestling team for school, yeah, running around the halls and everything with the bags on, and
yep,
back in the old school days, they'd put on like trash bags and stuff to just
yep.
work up a sweat and all that.
Some yep.
But the thing that I remember is I've never been that tired that way. It was similar to, when you're trying to work yourself back to be an athlete in a particular sport and you do a lot of running and weightlifting, but it's nothing like when they say football condition versus just being in shape, being in football shape, they're two different. You can run a zillion miles, you can do sprints, you can do everything. But once you get on a football field and you start doing Hogan's alleys and hamburger drills and that kind of stuff, you get worn out regardless of how good a shape. That's what it reminds me of. And I remember having wrestling matches against like three other dudes who didn't know what they were doing either. And like I was a decent athlete, so I like threw the first three guys around, and we had like a little tournament in seventh and eighth grade. But once I ran into a wrestler,
Mhm.
forget it.
Yep,
I was wiped out, had
yep,
no idea. He made me look like a fool.
yep, exactly, and to your point, like you said, that's just kind of like, general, just kind of physical education type of wrestling, so kind of what you were feeling there, just think about that, against the highest level, against the biggest guys, and then trying to come back and, you know, come back from your body depleted and having to cut weight, and he had to cut weight in a short amount of time, so it was a quick weight cut. And a quick weight cut will deplete you. Like, you will feel run down, you will feel sluggish on top of already the training that you're having to do because naturally, I mean, carbohydrates, fats feed glycogen to the muscles. Glycogen in the muscles is what fuels your body. And so if, he's cutting down on carbohydrates and all that stuff, and then he has to build it back up, his body's going to be more prone, especially if he's building it back up quickly. His body's going to be more prone to injury just because once your muscle and stuff like that kind of comes back, if it comes back quicker and outgrows, grows too quick for the ligaments, or the muscle gets too strong for the ligaments, then you can have ligament issues. So that's why they're being extra cautious and extra careful about probably putting this weight on slowly and then slowly integrating him into the live reps. So that way that doesn't happen, because on top of that, the body's wore down and it takes a little bit of time to recover. So I like the strategy they're using. Terrence Knighton said it's going to be Matt Rule's call ultimately on when he gets, back to, more of the live contact reps and stuff like that. But um, the actual plan they have in place, because they, with the injuries last year, they need to keep an extra eye on how they're handling, certain things like this. I think they've kind of learned their lesson and they're just being smart, because the thing is, when you look at the end of the day, Nash doesn't need a ton of work in terms of live reps. You got these young guys here. He can be a mentor over there, a coach, kind of on the side, and get them reps. He has so much game experience. He's such a talent that he's going to fine tune little aspects of his game, but he doesn't have to get out there and kill himself this spring.
Now, Justin, this is what came to mind when you were talking about what an excellent pass rush can mean for a football team. And I've always thought, in addition to, especially as the game has evolved into a passing game, the pass rush is the most important component, I think, in college football.
Yep.
To reverse that, you could say the offensive line is, I think, the most important unit, but that's because they have to protect the most important player on the field.
Yep.
So I think of it this way. Think of this, folks. Take 100 pass plays on defense for Nebraska against its opponents. Just take a block of 100 pass plays. And regardless of how good your pass rush is, you're not getting there every time. You're not affecting the quarterback every time. They're too good. They get the ball out of their hands too much. The lines you're playing are too good. You just can't. But so let's say a good pass rush, not a great pass rush, but a really good pass rush gets home. And when I say home, I'm not talking about a sack. I'm talking about affects the passer in some way 70% of the time. Say 70 out of those 100 plays. And let's say where Nebraska was a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago in that range. Let's say, and we'll even be kind, we're getting home 30 times out of 100. For those 40 plays, understand that when the pass rush doesn't get home, that's why you have guys that can tackle in space, cover guys that can break up passes, all that business. But you have just eliminated 40 plays out of 100 where it doesn't matter what anybody else did. They can blow the coverage, they can get burned, they can we'll never know if they would have missed a tackle because every ill in the back seven is wiped out because of what those 4 dudes were able to do, or one dude was able to do up front and get to the quarterback.
Yeah. And another big aspect that people don't really kind of take into account there is, you have, let's look back at the Chenander defense when we didn't have a defensive line that could get off blocks, and we didn't have a defensive line that could put pressure on the quarterback themselves. When you have a defensive line that can do that, you can put 4-on-4, right? You don't have to then bring stunts and take other people out of their positions. What was happening with Chenander's defense is, again, it was an aggressive style of defense, but it seemed like every single time to get pressure on the quarterback, they'd have to bring some kind of delayed stunt. And for people, that don't know what a stunt is, it's some kind of package where, a linebacker is going to be on a little delayed blitz and try to shoot the gap, something like that. And when we were doing that, it always came a half step late. Like the pressure would get there, but it was always like a step or a half step late. And so it really wasn't affecting the passer enough, or wasn't affecting it. It just seemed like it was there to be had, but the defensive line was not opening up the gaps quickly. And then it was such a delayed thing to finally get the opening that they wouldn't even get there in time. So that's another aspect too, is when you have, it's such a valuable thing when you have guys that can get off their blocks and get there when they are just one-on-one, then you don't have to bring those stunts. You don't have to move those linebackers out of position. You don't have to bring the jack and rover down. Like, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. You can use those stunts in more of a specific time frame in the game, and not just because we can't get pressure on the quarterback, we have to run a bunch of stunts. Those stunts were taking people out of position, and that was opening up huge gaps in the defense. And we were just getting gashed left and right because, and you talk about the offensive line being the most important, which I agree. But the reason the offensive line is most important because how important the defensive line is. So those two work hand in hand. The offensive line wouldn't be as important as it is unless the defensive line was such a big aspect. And so that was, I think, the biggest thing that gives confidence for next year, and especially with the cornerback rotation, not necessarily knowing who's going to be, the second corner, et cetera. The fact that you have more of a sure thing at defensive line, it really makes that decision, I guess, a little bit less of a risk, right? You know that you have a defensive line there that's going to help take pressure off of these guys. So if you make the wrong decision, it's not as, I guess, damning as if you didn't have a defensive line and these guys are just going to get beat, which I don't necessarily think is going to happen, but it just helps when you have other position groups lacking behind them, that being there makes those decisions much more easy, and you can rotate these guys a little bit more and kind of get more reps and stuff like that, because there's going to be situations there where that defensive line is just going to take a lot of the pressure off them completely, because offenses are going to be really, really keying in on trying to stop our defensive line, which is going to really open up the linebackers and secondary, and linebacker core is really good too.